This will sound very strange, but the word Trump in archaic English means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. President Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to highlight and confirm his signs. The most infamous phone call in all of American political history between President Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in July of 2019 regarding corruption involving Ukraine and the Biden crime family is a prophecy that is predicting that on July 28, 2022, the Biden administration will officially announce it is giving new powers to an office within the Department of Health and Human Services to take a more prominent role in responding to health crises. And it is also predicted that on July 28th, the Biden administration will also announce that monkeypox is a national health emergency. Besides what I am about to explain in this video, the date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. Today's date is July 26th, and so I realize that this is in the news as a possibility, and so I therefore realize that this isn't much of a prediction. However, it was known since April 9th that July 28th would be the day of a new pandemic. As we can see here, this is an email thread, and this email was sent on April 10th. And here I am talking about the prophetic signs that occurred on April 9th, which point to 110 days later, which is July 28th, and how these signs on April 9th communicated that there will be a new pandemic that will symbolically begin on July 28th. Here, for example, in this thread, I also mention how April 9th was exactly 110 weeks after Trump announced the first death in King County in Washington State. It was the symbolic beginning of COVID-19, and that was announced at 2 p.m., and at the same time, it was announced that there were 22 cases of COVID-19 in America. If you have watched some of my other videos, you will recognize immediately the prophetic significance of a series of twos in relation to COVID-19 and the government. And so, in other words, it is exactly 110 weeks from the official announcement of the beginning of COVID-19 in America to April 9th and the prophetic signs that occurred on April 9th. And then in turn, it is 110 days to July 28th. Now, it is explained in other videos, but one of the confirmations of adding 110 days to April 9th was the prophetic sign, which was the vandalism of the tomb of Joseph in Israel, and Joseph died at the age of 110. Here in this email, for example, you can see that I am talking about the vandalism of the tomb of Joseph right here, and then I am saying that it is in conjunction with signs that are pointing to the coming plague, which will come out of Ukraine. And one of the signs we received on April 9th was Boris Johnson's visit to Ukraine and his walk through the streets of Kiev with Zelensky, but that is explained in another video. But part of what is being pointed to here by God is that this monkeypox virus is another laboratory chimera, and it was developed in the US-funded bioweapons laboratories in Ukraine. Anyway, the point being here is that this proves that this prediction was known a long time ago. And one reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove what I have just said. Also, 110 days can be divided into 73 days and 37 days. In the Bible, Joshua also died at the age of 110. Joshua and Joseph are both prophetic types for Jesus. In the book of Joshua, Joshua led the Hebrews around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets, which is 3 sets of 7. There are also 3 sets of 7 judgments from God described in the book of Revelation. The number 73 and the number 37 both hint at 3 sets of 7. Which is why 110 days, which symbolizes Joshua, can be divided into 73 days and 37 days. 73 days after the prophetic signs on April 9th, that included the vandalism of Joseph's tomb, and 37 days before July 28th was June 21st. This was the day that Joe Biden made a gaffe in saying that there will be a second pandemic. The reason why Biden is a gaffe-making machine is because God is using Biden's gaffes for prophetic signs. All right, the amazing information in this video that is included in this diagram was produced before April 9th. And rather than edit this video and update it to the current prediction for July 28th, what I'm going to do is leave this video as it is, as further proof that July 28th was known since the prophetic signs that occurred on April 9th. The prophetic signs that occurred on April 9th are explained in amazing detail in the absolute must-watch Obama in Ukraine prophecy video. As interesting and important as the information is in the current video that you are watching, the Obama in Ukraine video is more important. I recommend watching both, but the Obama in Ukraine video is more important, and it will explain the prophetic signs that occurred on April 9th that are pointing to July 28th and the symbolic beginning of a new pandemic. Please don't get me wrong though, the video that you are currently watching, this Trump-Zelensky video, is also a very important video. It's just that you might want to watch the other video first because it explains the April 9th signs, which are extremely important. But in that video, I leave a link to a study regarding the current strain of monkeypox virus, and the scientific paper determines that it isn't a natural strain. The current monkeypox strain that is circulating around the world is descended from a monkeypox strain that was exported from Africa to laboratories in the United Kingdom. And therefore, we can assume that they were also then exported to Ukraine, which is what God is communicating in this video. The scientific study also determines that the current strain is much different than the strain that was exported to the UK. In other words, it was tinkered with, it was manipulated in a laboratory, and God is communicating that this laboratory was a US-funded bioweapons laboratory in Ukraine. In the description box below this video, I will also leave a link to a paper by the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Munich Security Conference in which they conducted a tabletop exercise regarding a bioweapons terrorist attack that kills millions of people around the world, and the bioweapon is a monkeypox virus, and this tabletop exercise was conducted in March of 2021. In the exercise, it is hypothesized that this terrorist monkeypox attack would begin on May 15th, 2022, and it just so happens that the first reported case of monkeypox at the World Health Organization was on May 13th, 2022. I don't know if you believe in coincidences, but I don't. All right, so this extremely important video will be focused on the prophetic signs that occurred on this date, March 20th, 2022. And I'm just going to go through what happened, and then through the rest of the video, through the course of this video, we will flesh out the prophetic significance of what happened. And it is very important. And so let's just begin with, there are 4 prophetic signs in total. 2 of them involve the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. Okay, so first of all, on this day, the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, officially announced the banning of 11 political parties, his opposition parties, including the biggest opposition party. All 11 parties supposedly were Russian ethnic Russian parties. So if you're not aware, the country of Ukraine is not a uniformed country. In fact, it is extremely diverse. Factionalism is a big problem in the cohesiveness of this country. The conflict that is ongoing there currently is arguably in many ways a civil war. It's not simply an invasion of a democratic country by a tyrant. There's much more to that. It's very complicated. It's very complex, and it involves a civil war, and it involves the Russian ethnic Ukrainians in the eastern part of the country. These images here demonstrate this, how badly divided this country is. And it's divided more than just between two sides, actually, but largely it's divided between the East and the West and between Ukrainian-speaking and Russian-speaking. This, for example, is the breakdown in the Ukrainian election in 2004. Okay, here is the 2010 election that then resulted in a coup that was, by the way, orchestrated by U.S. deep state CIA, not coincidentally, during the Winter Olympics that were being held in Sochi, right over here. In other words, it was designed to poke Putin, to push him over the edge. It was at this point that Putin said that was enough. With the whole pushing of Ukraine to join NATO. In other words, this is very controversial, but it's true. Putin is the result of the West. We created Putin. Putin rose to power because it goes back into history. By the way, speaking of Ukrainian history being very, very old and this conflict being very, very centuries old, okay, in the making. But speaking of history, there was the Budapest summit of NATO in 2008 in which the U.S. declared that Ukraine and Georgia would be part of NATO. Just a couple of months later, that was in March of 2008, just a couple months after that was the conflict between Russia and Georgia. And that was a direct result of the U.S. claiming that Georgia would become part of NATO. It promised these people in Georgia and Ukraine, it gave them hope, but it was a fantasy. Ukraine was never going to become part of NATO. It was part of this liberal imperialism fantasy by the dummies in Washington that also expanded NATO in the first place, because we promised Russia in the 1989 that we wouldn't move NATO further east after incorporating East Germany, and then we did. But this was crossing the line, trying to make Ukraine part of NATO. This is a part of Russian history. Kiev is the spiritual home of the Russian people. Okay, and the Russian people are a very proud people. And Putin tapped into that nationalistic pride, which was a danger after the fall of communism. That was the threat, that these states in their transition would transition into nationalistic dictatorships. And so that's what we asked for by doing these sort of arrogant, provocative things. But if you ask me, it's all spiritual, and this was by design too. This coup in 2014, during the show-off of the Russians and Putin of the elaborate billions of dollars spent on the Olympics, okay? Right during the Olympics, taking the focus off their Olympics. Amazing that, anyway. So that's why Putin is in the process of, I'm getting off onto a tangent here, but that's why this was also a threat to cutting off the Russians to a warm water port, because Russia is somewhat landlocked. That's a problem. They need this port, right? Threatening to take this into NATO is a problem, okay? And anyway, the history goes back, and this is also Russian-speaking territory, and they wanted to become part of Russia. So anyway, This image here demonstrates this badly divided country. Here's another one. This is a survey done with Ukrainians as to whether they would like to join NATO or not. The further west the city is, these are the cities, the further west it is, the more they want to join NATO. The further east it is, the less they want to join. So in other words, Ukraine is a very badly divided country. Naturally, of course, the Russians have been stoking that division over the last 8 years, but so have the Western Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians from the West. Also, the extreme nationalists in the West of Ukraine also been stoking the conflict as well, equally as guilty. And for example, right after their coup of the democratically elected president, whether he was elected without rigged elections is another story, but nonetheless, that's, it's no side is, innocent, I guess. But anyway, right after that, they immediately canceled minority language rights. That's not something you do to try to get the country to unify. Canceling language rights, that would be like if some nationalists in Western Canada took over the government and said, you know what, enough with this bilingualism. So they, that gives you an idea of politics in Ukraine. But anyway, there's a professor, you can Google it. I'll maybe leave a link to it in the description box below. Professor from the University of Chicago, with his lecture, very, very enlightening, with an alternative perspective other than the myopic, liberal imperialist perspective. We're not threatening Putin, all that, even if we take Ukraine. They don't see it that way, and that's what matters. It's how they see it, And furthermore, it's completely hypocritical, because we have the Monroe Doctrine, which says that the entire Western Hemisphere is our backyard. We wouldn't tolerate the Russians or Chinese anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, let alone on our border. Americans wouldn't tolerate for 1 second a Chinese military base on the border in Mexico or Canada. But that's what bringing Ukraine into NATO is for the Russians. And anyway, as he rightly asserts, the whole conflict is our fault. It is the West's fault. It is America's fault. The conflict is America's fault. Putin is the result of America in the first place, but then again, the conflict in Ukraine is a result of America because of this promising of NATO and pushing the Russians and giving this false hope to the poor Western Ukrainians for them to push Putin and Russians and their Eastern compatriots into going with the West. And his biggest opposition party had 43 seats out of a total of, I think, 200 seats. I could be wrong about that. It's a sizable opposition party. This political party, immediately upon the entry of Russia into Ukraine, announced that it was against what Russia was doing. And Zelensky provided no evidence of what he claimed, which was that these 11 political parties were somehow in support of the Russian invasion or whatever. But regardless, this is what happened, and we're just going to talk about this objectively here without giving too much opinion. Okay, so this is what happened. He banned 11 political parties, one of them being the biggest political party, and that party announced at the time that the Russians came in, that it was not in favor of what Russia was doing. Okay, and then Zelensky provided no evidence for it, but whatever. So what's important here, very important, is that it was not covered at all in the corrupt, lying Western propagandist media. there's talk about how there's propaganda from Russia, but there isn't talk about how there's propaganda from the Ukrainian side. And of course, there is no talk about the propaganda in the Western media, which there is a ton. And of course, it's just continuing their pattern of lying, especially over the last 6 years. So anyway, there was absolutely zero coverage of Zelensky banning the 11 parties, except on conservative media and also, for whatever reason, The Guardian, the liberal newspaper in the UK. So that in itself is a statement, and it's prophetic, that there was absolutely zero coverage of this most important news story about him banning 11 parties. You would think that story would be covered, but it isn't. Why is that? Because there is a propaganda narrative being perpetrated in the Western evil, lying, corrupt, lying, liberal mainstream media. And it's, of course, warmongering. There is a propaganda campaign going on to escalate the conflict. All right? That's a fact. And this is evidence of it. It's 100% evidence of it. This is a major story, and it was not reported at all. I went through, for example, Reuters and Associated Press, along with Googling, etc. But there was no mention of it at all on these supposedly, Reuters and Associated Press being the sources for news for a lot of other news outlets, right? Anyway, at the same time, he also banned 3 news media outlets and consolidated everything into one news media outlet, which is state operated by him. Okay, that's also undemocratic. There will be the Ukrainian apologists, those that are, choosing this side, that also condemn those that don't choose this side. And, in other words, according to them, you must choose a side and it must be Ukraine. Otherwise, you are immoral. And anyway, and a Putin stooge. But anyway, this is totally undemocratic. It didn't fit the narrative, and that's why it wasn't reported. There was some coverage about him consolidating the news outlets, but zero coverage of the 11 parties that he banned. All right, now that's very important. Let's move on. On the same day, God gave us another totalitarianism sign. It was the announcement in Australia that the government was going to be cooperating with big tech and demanding that they share information with the government regarding their crackdown on supposed, quote, disinformation, quote. And by the way, what I just told you would be considered disinformation. It's propaganda. Again, it's lies. The sheep, the brainwashed, will tell you that, what I just said about the 11 parties being banned and etc. Anything that doesn't fit the narrative, and it's not about truth, it's about fitting the narrative, right? And so anyway, that was the announcement in Australia, one of 2 countries that are far ahead of the other Western countries in their race towards totalitarianism. Australia and Austria. Both these are the 2 countries. Now, that isn't a coincidence. It isn't a coincidence that these 2 countries' names are almost identical. Australia and Austria. This is because God is communicating through that coincidence. And what he is pointing to is Austria, the country, the home of Adolf Hitler. Yes, that's right. God is pointing to coming genocide and totalitarianism, Nazism. Okay? And there's tons of prophetic connections that prove that. And by the way, the things that I am saying will be proven to be true. The conclusions that are derived from God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that is only being explained on this channel. And that is the purpose of the prediction. The prediction being made here is that there will be something significant, very significant, that will occur on April 9th. I don't know what it exactly will be, but it looks like it will involve the bioweapons program. It could be a beginning of a pandemic. It could be a symbolic beginning, like, for example, March 11th, 2020, which I predicted with 100% certainty since June of 2019 that something very big and bad and world-changing would occur on that date. And that was the only date in the calendar that year that I was speaking about of such a thing. And that was the date, for example, among other examples, that the World Health Organization officially declared coronavirus to be a pandemic. In retrospect, I could have known that it would be a virus had I been paying more attention, or rather thinking about things more. But unfortunately, all I did was predict that it would be world-changing, and that was documented. And I knew that since June of 2019. And that was also the day of Trump's prophetic Oval Office speech that was 11 minutes long, that ended about coronavirus, that ended at exactly 9:11 p.m. on the clock on the live TV news screen. And one of the many reasons why I knew about March 11, 2020 ahead of time was because it was exactly 222 months after 9/11. The reasoning behind that is explained in other videos. The point being is that that was a symbolic day to the pandemic, and I predicted it ahead of time. It could be something similar, which, in other words, won't be recognized unless you're paying attention. In other words, what I may have to do is leave in the description box below this video exactly what happened, and then you'll go, oh yeah, he was right, okay? Because that has happened on over 100 instances where I have been very close, but it was something that was obviously I was right, but a skeptic and an unbeliever just isn't going to believe it. For example, I predicted there would be an explosion based on signs connecting with Harrison Ford on October 17th, 2020. And then the national news story was an explosion in Harrisonburg, Virginia, at the finish line of a marathon, which was why it connected with the 3 people were injured, and it connected with the bombing of the explosion at the finish line of the marathon at the Boston bombing that killed 3 people, and I knew that ahead of time as well. Anyway, coming back here, I don't know what's going to happen on this day, April 9th. It could be a bioweapons thing. If it does happen, I can guarantee you it will be a false flag. It will be blamed on Russia, but it won't be Russia. It will be some sort of deep state CIA Ukrainian thing. That's what's going on here. It's all designed to escalate into a war with Russia. But that's another story. I'm going to try to refrain from getting into that too much. But okay, so it could be a bioweapons attack. But anyway, the point, as I will get to, is that it is involving the clandestine bioweapons labs that are U.S. funded in Ukraine. This story came out. The Biden administration and officials in Washington denied this, that there were any U.S. funded biolabs in Ukraine. The embassy website, the U.S. embassy website in Kiev, deleted about 100 pages from its website. But then once it realized that there's something called the Wayback Machine and you can't delete things and people are going to know what was there, they put the pages back up with inane disclaimer saying that it's no big deal. We're just doing things to, make sure that swine flu in the pig population doesn't get out of control. But it's nonsense, of course. In other words, what they were saying, which was repeated verbatim without any questioning by the mainstream media, the lying Democrat mouthpiece mainstream media, they were essentially saying, it's no big deal, don't think about it. They lied at first, and then they were found to be telling a lie, and so then they said, well, it's no big deal, don't think about it. But anyway, the point is that they lied about it at first, and then when they were caught, they changed their story. But at first, they said it was conspiracy theory, just like at first they said that the Wuhan lab theory was a conspiracy theory, and it was censored on the internet. It was anti-Chinese hate and Trumpism, etc. It was conspiracy theory, and then months later, they admitted that it was possible. Of course, that's ridiculous too. Anyone that knows anything and has looked at and has paid attention to the evidence that's not being reported in the mainstream news, it's obvious that it was a chimera engineered virus in the Wuhan lab in China. But the point is that that was called conspiracy at first. And well, after that, it was called conspiracy when people were saying that people would be forced or mandated to take the vaccine, and then of course that happened. It was said it was conspiracy theory when people were saying that there would be vaccine passports, and then of course that happened, and on and on. Okay, so that's what happened with the bioweapons lab story. It was conspiracy theory, and then right-wing conspiracy theory, and then of course it isn't. But what's the case right now is that the truth is that the U.S. has funded dozens of U.S. labs there. They took over the Soviet program. After the Soviet Union collapsed, I guess the thinking was to keep these scientists employed and not doing their own thing. And they brought them in from the other Soviet republics as well, brought them into Ukraine, a more desirous place to be, Odessa, near the sea and all of that. And anyway, they began this program, and they didn't destroy any of the vials from the Soviet program. They're in the freezers there still. But since then, they've expanded that program greatly. And the reason why, just for example, they built a brand new level 3 laboratory in Odessa in 2010. Okay. And U.S. funded. There was an entire floor for the U.S. scientists only, for example. Anyway, the Russians came in and got the documents from that facility, and along with other evidence, presented it at the UN Security Council on March 11th. But of course, it's just Russian propaganda. But besides that, we don't need the Russians to confirm that this program exists. This is confirmed by the Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, and also this guy named Robert Pope, the head of the Department of Defense, within the Department of Defense, responsible for the arms reduction. And anyway, he talks about the vials that are still in the freezers that are left over from the Soviet era bioweapons program. And they're there because, the scientists still want to do research with it, right? But the point is that God is pointing to this date, and he's pointing to the bioweapons program with this date. Without a doubt, there's far more evidence for that than just what's in this diagram here. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it could be a symbolic beginning to a new pandemic. And although it's not explained in this video or in this diagram, God is also pointing to this date and in general to Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. In other words, I believe that in these biolabs, they have been working on a chimera cross between some sort of airborne virus and the Crimean hemorrhagic fever. God is pointing to these signs in Congo, for example, and of Crimea as part of Ukraine. It's very brilliant that God would do this, to have this particular name for this disease, Crimean hemorrhagic fever. 2 places is in the name of this particular disease. Anyway, the other videos that I will make that will explain this, it's amazing what God is doing to point to this combination of Congo and Ukraine, which includes Crimea, hence the Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever. And what I believe is that there will be a hemorrhagic fever that will be airborne, and it will be released from this bioweapons lab. Now, obviously, the world is going to know that this isn't, from an animal. Just like, they made up the story about it being from an animal to cover their tracks with the Wuhan, or to try to anyway. And of course, the mainstream media feeds the brainwashing propaganda to the majority of people that believe that nonsense. But a lot of people do know that it's obvious, it's more than obvious that it was, in fact, it's 100% known that it was, an engineered chimera virus. There was the Nobel Prize winning David Baltimore, for example, who won his Nobel Prize through his work in virology, through viruses, and he found what he called the smoking gun, which was the furin cleavage site on the virus, which clearly showed that it was man-made. But also, this virus, it doesn't infect bats. That's another thing. The coronavirus, the COVID, doesn't infect bats. It only infects humans. The discoveries, in other words, that were found, including the furin cleavage site, show that it was actually designed to be contagious among humans. But that story isn't going to fly. The whole animal to humans story isn't going to fly this time. And they need this. They need this more deadly virus. And so it's going to be the plan is for it to come out of Ukraine, but at the same time, it's convenient with the whole warmongering narrative and David versus Goliath propaganda narrative. Ukrainians, holy warriors, and Russia, evil, satanic, tyrannical, overlords. That whole narrative is designed on purpose so that it won't be blamed on US-funded Ukrainian bioweapons labs. It will be blamed on Russia because, of course, the media, even the media has admitted, even they've been forced to admit that there are these labs there, but, don't think about it. It's just for, normal studies, for diseases in pigs. And that's why there's 30 of these labs. And that's also why, by the way, the population of Ukraine for years now have been experiencing outbreaks of weird diseases. But all that is Russian propaganda, Putin propaganda. This is all disinformation, right? I'm being sarcastic, of course. The point is that this will come out and it will be conveniently blamed on Russia. And Russia, of course, will blame it on Ukraine. But in the Western propagandist media, it will be called a false flag. In fact, they've been laying down the groundwork for this for weeks now. The mainstream media has been warning that this is coming, that the Russians are going to do something like this. And that's the reason why they've been warning about that, is because, in fact, what's going to happen is that the Ukrainians are going to do this, or something. Someone is going to do this, and it's because of the U.S.-funded bioweapons labs. And anyway, hemorrhagic fever. I'm including in this prediction hemorrhagic fever. Okay, so April 9th. Possibly the beginning of a new pandemic involving airborne hemorrhagic fever, which will ultimately lead to, just like Zelensky banning political parties and news outlets, it will lead to the same thing happening in the West and in America. In the name of war, political opposition will be banned, as well as supposed, quote, disinformation, quote. And so that's what's coming. And that's why one of the reasons for the escalation of the war, the purposeful escalation of this war, this civil war that we shouldn't be a part of. And I say that because it's in the best interest of the Ukrainians as well, that this war end as quickly as possible. But that's getting into something that's controversial, too controversial probably. But what is confirmed? Well, let's go on. As I was saying, Australia is hinting at the coming persecution of conservative Christians in the next coming genocide. That's why Australia and Austria. Austria, by the way, is the first country that has made it illegal to not take the VACCINE, which God has overwhelmingly confirmed is the mark of the Antichrist and is not the supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. And as Bible prophecy says, if one takes this mark, they will go to hell, but if they don't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell, quote, and that's hence why the VACCINE passports that limits people's ability to function in society, but it's ultimately leading to not being able to eat because you won't be able to partake in the rationed food that the New World Order United Nations will be responsible in distributing around the world. You won't be able to buy that food without the digital currency that's coming and your VACCINE passport. And so it's a test of faith, in other words. By the way, I don't believe that if you've already taken the VACCINE that you can't repent, even though it is the mark of the Antichrist. You can repent to God, ask for forgiveness, and don't take any more booster shots or the upcoming VACCINE to whatever pandemic may emerge, okay? And confirmation of that is that on the same day that Zelensky banned the 11 political parties, he delivered his speech to the Israeli Knesset, and he invoked the Holocaust, claiming that the Russians were involved in a Holocaust, which is obviously hyperbole and an exaggeration of what is going on there. And from what I understand, the Ukrainian military is just as guilty at using humans as shields as the Russians are. In fact, I have heard that, for example, the Azov Brigade in Mariupol, which is a Nazi organization, extreme right-wing nationalist Nazi-affiliated organization. The Azov Brigade is the brigade fighting in Mariupol. From what I understand, they are very guilty of not even allowing the Ukrainians from leaving, and they're using them as shields. That's my understanding. That's what I've heard. But we need to keep in mind that the first casualty in war is truth. That includes, on our side, the West side, when I say our, Western propagandist media. Now, I don't have it in this diagram here, but this day is a day of Ukraine signs, because we have these arguably three signs. We have the banning, which is 2-in-1 sign, if you will, and then the speech that Zelensky delivered to the Israeli Knesset that invoked the Holocaust, which again ties into the Australia sign because Australia hints at Austria, the home of Hitler. Now, Ukraine is made up of 44 million. At least it was when it was invaded. That's not an accident because it's pointing to the Antichrist, the 44th president. Ultimately, all of this is pointing to the Antichrist, including, by the way, this Harrison Butker sign, because again, it's pointing to Kamala Harris, who will die in a plane crash, who will then be replaced by Michelle Obama briefly before Obama replaces her. Michelle Obama will replace Kamala Harris as the vice president and then replace Joe Biden, who will step down, and then Barack Obama will become vice president and then become president after he replaces Michelle Obama. Anyway, so again, we have these signs that are Ukraine, Israel, and Australia tied together here. And again, Australia symbolizes Austria, the home of the Antichrist Hitler, responsible for genocide. which was mentioned on this date, the Holocaust. Okay? These signs, which again, Ukraine is 44 symbolism, were exactly 44 days after February 4th, which isn't in this diagram, which was the day that Austria became the first nation to make it illegal to not take the vaccine. It's not just, if you don't take it, you can't go to the gym, or you can't take a plane, or you can't leave the country, like in totalitarian Canada. But you cannot take, you don't have the option of not taking at all. If they stop you and ask you for your papers in Austria and you don't have the proper paperwork for proof of the vaccine, the first instance is a $3,000 fine. And then it goes up from there. Eventually, it's all leading to, and very soon, leading to internment camps, or like I was saying, you won't be able to buy food after the eruptions of the volcanoes around the world, including Yellowstone, which will create the food shortage, exacerbate the food shortage that's coming with the destruction of Ukraine and the sanctions with Russia. Because of course the world's food supply is dependent on these two countries, not just because they're the bread baskets of the world, but because of the exports of fertilizer and energy. But okay, this is how God's big picture of science works. It is so infinite. It's so extremely difficult to explain. And I'll just make this point right here, because this day that I'm talking about, February 4th, there's so much to be said and needs to be said about it and what it means and how it connects to other signs, including the United Nations, for example, and the sign in Congo 390 days earlier, which is part of the signs pointing to the Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever. It just goes on and on and on. But I'm going to limit it in this video at February 4th and just mention it briefly, because it deserves an entire video in itself. But anyway, that day, February 4th, the first day of the first nation outlawed being alive without taking the vaccine in Austria. That day was 44 days before the Australia sign. This day, February 4th, was also the day that the security wall, a portion of it, collapsed in Jerusalem, which was extremely prophetic, because walls collapsing in the Bible symbolize judgment, God's judgment. And it's the wall of security of Jerusalem, and the theme of Bible prophecy is the world coming against Jerusalem at the very end, before the remnant of Jews in Jerusalem call upon Jesus to save them out of desperation, after the armies of the enemies of Israel are aligned in the plain of Megiddo for the Armageddon battle. And then Jesus comes after they finally call upon him for their salvation, which is what Jesus said he wouldn't return until this happened. This is recorded in Zechariah chapter 12. And it's talking about that day of the second coming in Zechariah chapter 12. Well, anyway, that's the meaning or symbolism behind the collapse of the security wall in Jerusalem. And that's also confirmed with the connections to the February 4th date, which I said I wouldn't get into.
Saan ka lang? Piluin help. Silabas.
Naglasong din lang tumaas ng bawon si Makigali Cruz. Dahil kailangan ko na ako program ng pagdaso.
But that, as we can see, these signs on February 4th include Austria and Israel, and they connect with 44 days to the Australia sign and the Israel sign. In other words, that's a second confirmation of this 44 days connection. And again, another confirmation of it is that Ukraine is made up of 44 million people. What is confirmation of this? okay, is this 969 days to July 25th, 2019. This was the day that Trump had his infamous phone call with Vladimir Zelensky. The phone call regarded corruption. That was the theme of the call. Trump was asking Zelensky to help U.S. officials in their investigation of Joe Biden and his son and their involvement in corruption in extremely corrupt Ukraine. And if you don't know that Ukraine is a corrupt nation, the Transparency International organization that ranks countries ranks Ukraine number 122 out of 180 nations. It's at the very bottom. The country of Ukraine, unfortunately, after communism really stripped the values and morals of the people, but especially after communism, it left a vacuum in which the criminal elements rose to power. And organized crime is an entrenched part of Ukrainian society. It is a major part of the society. The vast majority of people in government in Ukraine are involved, they're part of different factions that have criminal organization elements and sponsors. It's all part of the clan, different clans competing with each other. It's a very mixed up country, and so there's lots of factions, but there's also all kinds of organized crime, and it's from top to bottom, including the presidency. There's obviously the corruption is endemic in this country, and so obviously the top spot is going to be a position that is gained through some kind of corruption, obviously, right? Well, it turns out that Zelensky is sponsored by this billionaire mafia guy named Igor Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky sponsors this guy. He drives him around in his car, for example. Zelensky has a mansion on the Amalfi Coast next to other Ukrainian mafia mansions, for example. And Kolomoisky, this guy Kolomoisky, importantly, in God's prophetic story that he's communicating through this diagram, Kolomoisky is the top guy for the corrupt US-funded bioweapons lab program. And so that's the point here that God is communicating with all of this, as we will further confirm as I go on. But that's Zelensky for you. Zelensky, most people that only get their news from, for example, from mainstream media, will see this fashionable, young, somewhat handsome-looking guy, and they juxtapose that with Putin, who's been portrayed in the media for many, many years now as this evil, just evil. He's in the media. He's compared with Hitler. Okay, but no doubt that Putin is evil and is a thug, but the portrayal of him in the media is really outlandish. But anyway, they love to juxtapose this supposed nice guy Zelensky with that guy. It's just comical because it's just brainwashing, right? But God designed it this way for people to be fooled. It's deception. It's like Jesus said, we are to judge. He warned us to judge rightly and not by appearances, and to judge a tree by its fruit. And so anyway, that's why God designed it that Ukraine has the pretty flag with the nice light blue color with the nice yellow color. It's part of the Antichrist spirit that has been transferred over to this issue from, the COVID moral panic and the Black Lives Matter moral panic and the anti-Trump disorder, psychological disorder that people had, the obsession with Trump. All of that's been transferred over again, and that's why the majority, the worldly people, are falling for it. But it was all designed that way. That's why the flag is the way it is, and why Zelensky has the appearance he has, in contrast with the aging, evil Putin, right? So my point is, though, is that Zelensky isn't the nice guy that everyone thinks he is. He's involved with the corrupt Ukrainian mafia, and also this guy Kolomoisky. And Kolomoisky is the guy that heads the program for the bioweapons. Okay? And that's why God has connected this Zelensky sign to these Zelensky signs with 969 days. This is stunning confirmation, okay, of it all. Because Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his signs. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet, or the sounding of a trumpet. And the Hebrews blew trumpets before the walls of security collapsed on Jericho. And that's why it isn't a coincidence that Trump's presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security, just for example. So that's why God uses Trump in his signs, and that's why this phone call was talked about in the media for many, many months after this. Constantly, it was the number one story, and it led to an impeachment of Trump. Okay? So this was very important, and it was a phone call to Zelensky regarding corruption involving Joe Biden, the most corrupt president in all of history. And Joe Biden and his son, well, through his son, was receiving millions of dollars from Ukraine through the backdoor deals, which I'm sure included the bioweapons program. And that's what's the key important thing about all of this. All right, so when I originally first recorded this, which was a number of days ago, it was at that point intuition more than anything that the whole Biden and Hunter Biden links to the corruption in Ukraine, because of the link between Zelensky and Kolomoisky, would include a link between Hunter Biden and the bioweapons program. Since that time, in the last few days, it has come to light in the mainstream, including an article which I'll leave a link to in the description box below, a mainstream media news article regarding the emails retrieved from Hunter Biden's laptop, which tie him to the bioweapons program. Big time. He was involved with connecting the Department of Defense subcontractors for the bioweapons program with agents and Burisma in Ukraine. I won't get into the details. You can read it for yourself in the article. It's very clear. So this was correct. God is amazing. He's tying all of this together. It's a big, fantastic plague of corruption story that God is telling, and he's using these players such as Biden, the Bidens, and Zelensky to communicate his message to the world regarding ultimately the plague of corruption for which the world must now be judged. But it's very interesting how all of this is coming through the issue of bioweapons labs. Furthermore, actually, the company that Hunter Biden is involved with is this company named Metabiota. And this Metabiota is partners with a company, Eco Alliance, which, if you've been following the truth and the stories regarding the Wuhan lab in Wuhan, China, was funded by or through Eco Alliance, through the CDC, through the US government. And Metabiota is a partner with Eco Alliance, and they are, in other words, partnered together in Ukraine. In fact, the guy involved with Eco Alliance, Peter Daszak, his father was part of the Soviet-era program in Ukraine with the bioweapons. So like father, like son. so it's just really amazing how it all comes together and it's all connected. But that's, by the way, all proven through the Hunter laptop, which the media also said coincidentally was conspiracy theory because it came out right before the election. And the New York Post, the fourth biggest newspaper in the nation, was banned from Twitter for a number of days before the election because they were reporting that story. Okay, and then people were allowed to report the story after. Only in the last few days, recent days, has the story gained any traction in the corrupt, evil, lying, wicked, liberal mainstream media, because it's finally forced to, because they're actually, for whatever reason, the wheels of justice are slowly turning, but Hunter Biden is about to be indicted because of the laptop, okay? So the laptop proves that Biden and Hunter were receiving millions of dollars. Hunter was on the board with the corrupt mafia-controlled Ukrainian oil companies. Kolomoisky is involved with that too. Okay, so now this sign here, this phone call with Zelensky is a sign, a prophetic sign, because it's Trump, and it connects with 969 days to this prophetic day here. And by the way, this sign, which I haven't talked about yet, is the big confirmation that these are prophetic signs, which I'll explain in a minute. But 969 days is, there's only 5 numbers in the 900 range that are prophetic. And 969 and the number 900 are by far more prophetic than the other ones, more used by God. The number 969, in other words, is a very important prophetic number in the Bible. It occurs in the Bible. It occurs in the account of Noah's flood. It's a Noah's flood judgment symbolism, number. And that's why it appears here, because this is judgment symbolism. It's judgment on America, ultimately. Everything that's happening here in Ukraine and the Russia-Ukraine conflict is ultimately coming back to America. And that's because America is God's Gentile nation. That's another story, but there's only 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on God. Not on ethnicity, not on language, not on geography, but founded on a relationship with God. And that was Israel and America. Okay, so that's why 969 days. Now, just to confirm that a little bit more, and again, this number comes from the account of Noah's flood. It's 972 days back to the extremely prophetic signs that occurred on this date, including the, quote, biblical floods, quote, that occurred in New York City, a very important city that God uses in his signs because of the 9/11 judgment warning, but also Trump is from New York City. On this day, we received the prophetic signs in Joshua Tree National Park and Yellowstone National Park, which I've explained before in other videos. I won't explain again. There's a lot to it, and that's why I'll just go off onto tangents, because that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming matters. It's what makes it true and not a product of one's imagination. And it's what makes it different and unique from other things, all other things. And so what happens, it's an interconnected web, and to explain one thing requires 2 and 3 witnesses, and those in turn require 2 or 3 witnesses, and those in turn require 2 and 3 witnesses, etc., into infinity, literally. But it's no coincidence that it works into infinity like that, because that's how the Bible works. The Bible isn't a linear document. It's interconnected with everything else. You can take an infinite number of paths through the Bible, as well as God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. But the point is that there was these floods, and 972 is another prophetic number that God uses in the 900 range. And this is the word it's the 972nd word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word for chosen ones. In other words, the chosen ones that would have been rescued from Noah's flood in the ark, for example. and also at the last trump, which will be at the Resurrection Rapture event on September 26th, 2022. But anyway, that's confirmation of the. Another confirmation of this is 5 months, because in the account of Noah's flood, the flood waters lasted for 5 months. Okay, so we have 5 months connecting from the biblical floods to this prophetic date here, which is this Harrison-Butker sign, which connects to this Harrison-Butker sign. All right, now, on this day here, December 22nd, 2019, Harrison-Butker kicked a double doink. This is when he's a kicker for a football team. For those that don't follow sports, he plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that God uses in his prophetic signs. And double doink is this term that was recently invented after this double doink, which is when the football hits one of the goalposts, bounces off of it, and then hits the other goalpost, and then bounces back into the end zone. And the kicker misses the goal, okay? So now Harrison-Butker is explained in other videos. The name Harrison hints at Harrison Ford and also Kamala Harris, who will die in a plane crash and then be replaced by Michelle Obama, and who will then be replaced by Barack Obama. And this will be the double doink presidency of Barack Obama, the Antichrist. And this will be during the 117th Congress, which began in January of 2021, which is the reason for this 117 weeks exact connection to this Harrison-Butker sign. Harrison-Butker on this day spoke in a podcast, and he said that he would rather retire than take the VACCINE and comply with any VACCINE mandate. He said he would rather remain true to his Christian faith, which is a sign, a prophetic sign that confirms that the VACCINE is the mark of the Antichrist, for example. Because, for one thing, again, it occurred, this sign, and this was a big news story in the sports world, by the way, but this sign occurred in conjunction with Zelensky delivering his speech to the Israeli Knesset and invoking the Holocaust on the same day that Australia is going to be working with big tech in censorship. The government is going to be involved with censorship because, according to the article, 76% of Australians say they have encountered, quote, disinformation, quote. And the article makes it seem like they all want the banning of it or something. But anyway, that's why Australia is linked to Austria, the home of Hitler, the country that was the first one to make it illegal to not take the VACCINE. And also, it's involved with this extremely undemocratic course of action that Zelensky took. Anyway, Harrison-Butker, his Christian faith lines up with the fact that he plays for the Chiefs. God used the Chiefs in especially 2019 and the Super Bowl in 2020 to symbolize the church. Because, well, it was their first Super Bowl in literally 50 years. In the Bible, a 50-year period is extremely prophetic, and it symbolizes God's people returning to their original inheritance. And the number 50 symbolizes the church. The Feast of Pentecost symbolizes the church, and Pentecost literally means 50th day, which, by the way, is why this Harrison-Butker prophetic sign, double doink, was exactly 50 weeks after this extremely prophetic double doink in Chicago, the place that the Antichrist is from, Barack Obama. Actually, both of these double doinks were in Chicago. And this game in Chicago is known for having been kicked. The double doink was kicked right at the end of the game with 9 seconds left in the game. And as I will explain, player number 9 played for Philadelphia, which was the prophetic player in this game. But also this game here was known, well, it's not as famous as this double doink, but this double doink was kicked from the 23-yard line with the score at 23 points. And God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together as confirmation of Barack Obama signs, because he's using these two numbers paired together to point to Barack Obama, reveal the identity of Barack Obama, which is explained in other videos. In a game against Philadelphia, another team and city that God uses to symbolize the church that will be spared the tribulation period, the only one of the 7 churches that will be spared, as Jesus said. Okay? And speaking of churches, the church that comes after the Church of Philadelphia in the book of Revelation is the Church of Laodicea. And this date here was exactly 36 months after March 20th, 2019, and the extremely prophetic earthquake in Laodicea, Turkey. And God uses 36 months connections extremely frequently in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, because from the Bible, it symbolizes 3 years, and 3 years was the amount of time that was given after Ahab repented before the destruction of the nation. Just exactly 3 years after Bill Clinton repented live on television with the priests was exactly to the hour and minute, the last minute that the last building fell on 9/11. 36 also because it is symbolism for 666, which from the Bible is Antichrist symbolism. 36 is 6 times 6, and it is also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And also the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666, the location of the Church of Laodicea. And on that same day was the prophetic hole-in-one hit by the evangelical president, George W. Bush, in Dallas, Texas, a city that symbolizes the American Evangelical Church, the capital of evangelicalism, according to the mainstream media, on the 12th hole, and the number 12 symbolizes the church in the Bible, on a golf course named Trinity Golf Course on a par 3 hole. In other words, it was a 3 par in 1 sign, Trinity Golf Course, in Dallas, Texas, that made it an X marks the spot, clearly pointing to the location of the Church of Laodicea, the American Evangelical Church, for its Nicolaitan doctrine and resultant works, which Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on those that have this doctrine and have works that are a result of this doctrine. This Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is why the quarterback in this game for Philadelphia, player number 9, which symbolizes judgment, is named Nick Foles, hinting at the Nicolaitan doctrine of the American church. And that Nicolaitan doctrine God has overwhelmingly confirmed to be Calvinism, which comes in the package of sovereign grace, free grace. Sovereign grace comes in the package of Calvinism, and free grace comes in the package of dispensationalism. These are the Nicolaitan doctrines of our day, and they both lead ultimately to the heretical doctrine of once saved, always saved. The big doctrine that is the root reason, the bad doctrine that is the root cause of the bad fruit of the American Evangelical Church, which also includes other things like the myth of imputed righteousness as evangelicals understand it. All Christians will be raptured, and our righteousness is as filthy rags, one verse that Martin Luther took out of context in order to develop his unfortunate doctrine, and also which flatly contradicts many other passages in the Bible, and other doctrines that are related. So, and also the reason why this X marks the spot hole-in-one in Dallas occurred in Dallas to symbolize the Church of Laodicea, or to point to it, identify it, is because Dallas is also the home of these false doctrines. Dallas is the location that churns out through their theological seminaries the pastors of the nation that are taught in Dallas these heretical doctrines of Calvinism, sovereign grace, and free grace dispensationalism, the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. If you are a Christian watching this especially, the big warning for you is this. The reason for the prediction being made in this video is to get your attention to what I'm saying. Make sure you watch the end of this video. Watch all of this video all the way to the very end. There is much more to be said at the very end of this video, and I will elaborate more on what it is and what I'm talking about with this Nicolaitan doctrine of our day and how it isn't what the early Christians believed. Anyway, that's the reason for all of that. And so anyway, the Chiefs, yes, the Chiefs also symbolize the church because it was the first Super Bowl in 50 years. But also, actually, the day that they won the AFC Championship and therefore made it to the Super Bowl in the first time in 50 years, that same day was the third of 3 extremely prophetic earthquakes in Hutchinson, Kansas, right near Kansas City, where the Chiefs play. The Kansas City Chiefs. And that was one of 3 earthquakes that were 4.0 or greater. And all 3 of them pointed to Ann Hutchinson. And there's more proof for that too. But Ann Hutchinson is the leader of the heretical free grace movement in the Boston colony at the spiritual founding of America, for which she and her followers were banned. But today, free grace, and it's once saved, always saved, is widespread, prevalent, dominant in evangelical culture. But they would have been banned at the spiritual founding of America. And by the way, that earthquake on the day that the Chiefs went to the Super Bowl was exactly 144 weeks after, I forget her first name, the Ukrainian that was shot by Alec Baldwin on the movie set in the 47th state. The 47th president, Barack Obama, the Antichrist, that's why. Shots symbolizing the VACCINE shots. And what's interesting too, though, is that she is Ukrainian. And as we will see in a second, it connects. That day was, although I forgot to put it in this diagram, unfortunately, the day she was shot, the day the news was announced, the story, October 22nd, 2021, was exactly 6 plus 6 plus 6 weeks to the day that Russia went into Ukraine, which was made up of 44 million people. And so it was the Ukrainian that was shot to the Ukrainian invasion, right? And that in turn is 44 days from the 44 million country to this day here, which is this something to do with the Ukrainian bioweapons labs, okay? All right. The 6 plus 6 plus 6 weeks obviously is Antichrist symbolism, which therefore, by the way, confirms the shot symbolizing the VACCINE shots. It isn't the only shots, as in gunshots, sign that's actually symbolizing VACCINE shots, but that's another story. So, Harrison Butker, okay, so we've explained this here. The Chiefs also, by the way, their team colors symbolize fire, which also symbolizes Pentecost, which symbolizes the church. The Feast of Pentecost symbolizes the church. And let's see, also, when they went into the Super Bowl, the quarterback sold off his firefighter helmet on charity on eBay. The 2 mayors from Kansas City and San Francisco, the first ever female fire chief in Kansas City and the first ever openly lesbian fire chief in San Francisco had a bet with each other. Halftime, the singers were said to have been on fire. And the big story of the sports story aspect of the game was how supposedly, well, not supposedly, I mean, that was the headline, the Chiefs had caught fire at the end of the game, scoring 3 touchdowns in the last 7 minutes. A touchdown is 7 points. 3 touchdowns is 3 sets of 7. And Harrison Butker is number 7, and he is involved with other 3 sets of 7 signs, which is paralleling or pointing to the 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua before the walls of security fell, the 7 priests that blew 7 trumpets over 7 days of marching, and then also the 3 sets of 7 judgments in the book of Revelation. Okay, so I explained Harrison Butker now. So 50 weeks, well, the Feast of Pentecost is literally meaning the 50th day, but it also is known as the Feast of Weeks. Hence why God uses 50 weeks connections. And that's why it's exactly 50 weeks in between these 2 double doinks that are symbolizing the double doink presidency of Barack Obama, who is from Chicago. Now, the thing is that we have an additional 3 weeks here, which is the 3 sets of 7 from this Harrison Butker sign, which God has used in other 3 sets of 7 signs. And if we take all of these together, the 50 weeks, 117 weeks, and 3 weeks, we have a total of 170 weeks, which is extremely prophetic and very Antichrist because it hints at the number 17, which symbolizes the Antichrist that will be vanquished from the Temple Mount on the Day of Atonement at the return of Lord Jesus Christ. The ancient Jews would conduct a ritual sacrifice on the Temple Mount on the Day of Atonement, and using goats. And the goat is Antichrist symbolism. That's why the goat will be vanquished from the Temple Mount on the Day of Atonement in 2024. And the Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month, for which the number 17 symbolizes. Also, the Antichrist in the book of Revelation is used, a metaphor is used, and this beast, as a metaphor, has 7 heads and 10 horns, for which the number 17 also symbolizes. This isn't the only 170 weeks connection God has used in his signs. For example, this same kicker that kicked the double doink, he kicked the ball, hit the goalpost 4 times in one game, and that was 170 weeks before the Super Bowl that I was just talking about involving the Chiefs. But no, sorry, the Chiefs Super Bowl in 2021, not 2020. But anyway, I'm getting off subject here. No, sorry, it was 170 weeks to this last Super Bowl, 2022. But the point is that 170 weeks just happens to also be 1,190 days, which hints at 9/11. And the time that this kicker, player number 1, hit the goalpost 4 times in one game on the date 11/11 in 2018, the 100th anniversary of World War I, in the same in the soldier field, a field named after the soldiers that fought World War I. And the first goalpost was hit with 11 minutes remaining in the game. The second goalpost was hit with 11 minutes remaining in the second quarter. The third goalpost was hit with 11 minutes remaining in the third quarter at 11:09, which hinted at 9/11. And the fourth goalpost was hit with exactly 8 minutes and 46 seconds remaining in the quarter. And Flight 11 hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. on 9/11. It was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people. The second plane had a crew of 9 people that hit the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union. Because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out. As in last chance for the nation to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction. All right, that's why this. Anyway. That's confirmation of all of these. Amazing confirmation. It's a second witness, in other words. And as I said, that's how God's big picture of signs, his true big picture of signs works. Okay, now, as I mentioned, this is 44 days. This event will involve Ukraine. It's 44 days back, symbolizing the 44th president, to the day that the nation of 44 million was invaded. And we also have this, because speaking of double doinks, it's exactly 70 weeks. The most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy. It regards also the symbolic period of the end times and the 70th week. And so it's exactly 70 weeks from this double doink to the day that the double rainbow guy died. The guy that was the first guy, they say, to have gone viral in the early days of social media and YouTube. And he was the guy that ranted on about the double rainbow in his backyard, and he lived, and his backyard was a national park, which gave it national judgment symbolism, because the rainbow is God's sign regarding judgment, recorded in Genesis chapter 9. One of the reasons why the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is why this player, Nick Foles, was number 9 for Philadelphia. Okay, and he died on this day, and this was exactly 144 months after Barack Obama made his infamous 57 instead of 50 states gaffe, which was in turn exactly 144,000 hours before the Day of Atonement in 2024, when he, the Antichrist, will be vanquished on the Temple Mount by the return of Lord Jesus Christ. But his 57 states instead of 50 states gaffe was exactly 50 years after the TV episode aired titled End of the World, in which the plot involved a man named Trump that tried to sell the townsfolk of an Old West town a wall of security. Amazingly enough, that's a sign from God, obviously. It's amazing. But that was 50 years to the 50 states gaffe. Speaking of the number 50, again, 50 weeks, right? Okay, and then 70 weeks, okay, to this double rainbow, which is confirmed by the connection to the double doink, is also the day that the news story broke about Obamagate. And this was the day that Barack Obama, because it connects with his 50 states gaffe, it's 144 months prior to this, to that, exactly, to May 9th, 2008, when he was on the campaign trail. This was the day that he, or rather the media, played the recording of a phone call that he had, which was supposedly leaked. It was supposedly a private call that was leaked, but it was obviously staged because Barack Obama was fearful of the news story that was coming about Obamagate and how his administration in the transition period attempted to thwart the presidency of the incoming president. One of the biggest crimes ever committed by a president in history. He orchestrated his FBI to do illegal maneuvers and investigations on Trump, unfounded allegations that all stem back to this, Ukraine and Zelensky. The corruption coming from Ukraine got involved in the presidential campaign in 2016. And as Democrats do, basic communist tactic is to accuse the other side of exactly what you're doing. In this case, interfering in the election, supposedly Trump collusion with Russia, but in fact it was the other way around. Hillary Clinton was colluding with Ukraine, and it involved the famous Christopher Steele dossier. Okay, now what people don't realize is that Christopher Steele, although he worked for British MI6, he was in charge of the Moscow desk. And he is eyeball deep in corruption in the transition period after the Soviet Union fell. He's big time corrupt in with Kolomoisky and therefore Zelensky. And in other words, Christopher Steele is involved in the bioweapons program, okay? But Christopher Steele, it turns out, is involved with this phone call. So it all connects. God is the master prophetic artist, signs artist, okay? He's connected all of this, including the corruption regarding Obamagate. And by the way, Obamagate, because in the Bible, gates symbolize, judgment begins at the gates of the nation or city. It all involves the corruption involving Ukraine and the attempt to steal the election in 2016 from Trump through the fake black ledger that was supposedly, the accounting ledger, which was all a forgery. It's come out, by the way. That's, by the way, not controversial. That's bipartisan because the left-leaning Politico, for example, if you want to Google it, did a in-depth investigation on the whole origins of the Christopher Steele dossier, which was the whole background, the whole reason for the first attempt to impeach Trump. Not only did they try to steal the election through the dossier, but also they tried to impeach him afterwards. The whole Russia collusion, which went on for years, which was a complete hoax, and in fact was corruption from the Democrats. And anyway, that's what Obamagate was about. And so it all ties together here, okay? And it's all coming out in the end. Because here's the bottom line here. The anti-Trumpism was rooted in spirituality. The truth is, the Trump derangement disorder is rooted in rebellion against God. The Democrat Party has lost its soul. It sold its soul to the devil many years ago. It has become the anti-God party. And that's why they hate Trump. They don't really know why they hate Trump. They just do. But it's all the reason why they don't really know why is because it's spiritually rooted. And that's what Trump was for. That's why he had the personality that he had, by the way, and why it's juxtaposed with Obama's personality. Everyone loves Obama, and they despise Trump's personality, right? Well, that's designed by God because Jesus warned to judge rightly and not by appearances. It's designed by God that Zelensky and Obama have these nice-looking appearances and speak well and appear to be the good guy. I'm not saying Putin is the good guy, by the way. That's more propaganda that you would even think that I would be saying that by saying such a thing about Zelensky. It's emotional propaganda. You're not allowed to say anything against the narrative. It's a mass formation, a mass psychosis, just like COVID. You can't present facts to these people. They get irate, and they call you a traitor or a conspiracy theorist or whatever. It's actually something. It's a legitimate thing in psychology. There's a professor from Ghent University in Belgium that's talked a lot about this, and a lot of conservatives know about what I'm talking about. It's called a mass formation. Anyway, that's what's going on. It's a hypnosis. It's the same thing that happened in Germany and Russia in the 1930s. It's happening now. It's one moral panic after another. It's a hypnosis. That's what COVID was. That's why you can't present facts to the people, and that's why they're susceptible to the nonstop brainwashing. And if you go against it, you're immoral. You're a lesser citizen, as Emmanuel Macron says, if you don't take the VACCINE, for example. And that's why these lesser citizens will not be able to get the rationed food if they don't take the VACCINE. Complete hysteria, propaganda, mass formation, totalitarianism, which is what Zelensky is symbolizing in these signs right here, totalitarianism with the banning of political and news outlets, which is what is coming because the Democrat Party is the new totalitarian party. And 30% of the population of America is hypnotized into totalitarianism. That's what's going on. But ultimately, it's rooted in their hatred of God. They don't know they hate God, but they're rebelling against God. That's what's ultimately going on, and that's why they hate Trump. Okay, enough said, I think. I've painted the picture how this is all full circle. This is a very important video. It talks about the truth about a lot of things here, and God has brought all of these truths out through Zelensky. It's amazing. And this conflict in Ukraine, which will ultimately be corruption coming home to roost. Because if there is a pandemic that comes out of Ukraine, it will ultimately be because of corruption in America. As the book of Plague of Corruption aptly is titled, Plague of Corruption, foreword written by Robert Kennedy Jr. That's what's really going on. It's a plague of corruption, and it's coming home to roost. COVID was a product of American corruption as well because of the Wuhan lab, which was also funded by the US. We are to believe that, okay, the US funded the Wuhan lab. I guess there's maybe some Democrats that still don't know that. But the US didn't fund these Ukrainian bioweapons labs. They didn't take over the Soviet program and make it into their own on the cheap, because they didn't really have one, because they were focused on nuclear weapons before all of this, before the collapse, of the Soviet Union. So they adopted their program. And by the way, I have another video that shows how the visit of Obama, which is extremely prophetic, Obama is extremely prophetic. He visited Ukraine. He is the guy, one of two senators that went to Ukraine in 2005 and signed the agreement with the Ukrainians regarding their bioweapons labs. Obama was in a bioweapons lab in Ukraine, and it actually connects extremely prophetically with what I'm talking about here that will occur on April 9th, but that's a different video. Okay, so I think I've given you the goods here. Don't believe the media. It's time. The bottom line is it's time to stop. Period. Cold turkey. Stop consuming the mainstream media. It is nothing but lies. It's satanically driven. They don't realize it, but they are working for Satan because they are rebelling against God. They don't know it, though. And they're very useful idiots, as Stalin put it. Stalin put it, he called liberals and moderate socialists, he called in the US, he called them useful idiots, because it's all leading to totalitarianism. Socialism is just a step, an inevitable step on the road to totalitarianism.